We, unaccustomed to courage exiles from delight, have coiled in shells of loneliness, until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us to life. These words come to us this morning from the first stanza of a poem called Touched by an Angel by the late Maya Angelou. My friends, the events of this past week have caused me to shift course a little bit today. As we think about the isolating nature of a pandemic, a call for social distancing, and if you show signs of illness, to self-quarantine, it could be easy to find ourselves coiled in shelves of loneliness. It would be easy for us to let our fear overcome our faith. Fear prohibits faith. Fear leaves love in the holy temple rather than recognizing its liberating presence around us and among us. My friends, this is a moment when it's time to live. This is a moment when it isn't time to live in fear, but rather to be courageous in our faith. Now, as is often the case, the pre-chosen text for today brings wisdom to light in our current situation. In this time of uncertainty, today's passage speaks to our community with a message of courage and of faith, and dare I say hope. This text speaks to us in tones of love that, as Maya Angelou says, liberates us to life. So as we hear the story of the woman at the well once again today, I invite you to indwell the courage of this woman and the love that Jesus demonstrates to her as he restores her to her community. Hear once again this profound exchange between Jesus and the woman at Jacob's well.
Today's scripture reading is John 4, 5 through 42. The woman at the well. He came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, which was near the land Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. Jesus was tired from his journey, so he sat down at the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to the well to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me some water to drink." His disciples had gone into the city to buy him some food. The Samaritan woman asked, "Why do you, a Jewish man, ask for something to drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" Jews and Samaritans didn't associate with each other. Jesus responded, "If you recognize God's gift, who is saying to you, give me some water to drink, you would be asking him, and he would give you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you don't have a bucket, and a well is deep. Where would you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave this well to us, and he drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water that I will give you will never be thirsty again. The water that I give you will become in those who drink it, a spring of water that bubbles up into eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will never be thirsty again." That ends our reading for today.
As I began to think about the message for today, I came across a TED Talk, which I have, by the way, also posted this TED Talk on my blog. And it was called "The Danger of a Single Story." The Danger of a Single Story by a Nigerian woman named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And here's her story. Growing up in Nigeria, she lived a comfortable, middle-class life, on a university campus where her father was a professor and her mother an administrator. This meant that her family, like many other families in that social class, could afford domestic help. And when she was 8 years old, she recalls that a new houseboy named Feedy came to work for them. Her mother told her only that he was from a poor family in a neighboring village. Now, Adichie was moved with pity by this boy's poverty. All she knew of his family is that his mother would send them extra food and old clothes. That was her single story of him. He was a poor boy. So when she visited Feedy's home one day, she was shocked to discover that his family was more than just the sum of their poverty. Feedy's brother showed her a beautiful patterned basket that he had made. That didn't fit her single story that she had in her head about Feedy's family. She didn't think they could be anything but poor. And her story continues, but in reverse this time. When she came to America to go to school, she was dismayed that her roommate asked her how she learned to speak English so well. English is the official language of Nigeria. And her roommate was also dismayed. Her roommate was dismayed this time because she had asked Achidi to play some of her tribal music for her. And she produced a CD of Mariah Carey. She describes her roommate's default position as patronizing, well-meaning pity, because she had only a single story of Africa. And that single story, our Western culture tells us, is one of beautiful landscapes and beautiful animals, of course, but also of people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. For her roommate, that was the single story, and that was easy to understand. And she didn't seem to know how to encounter Adichie as an equal, as someone who was like her in many ways, or as a complex person who was shaped by many stories. Of course, life would be so much simpler if everyone had a single story, wouldn't it? A story that shows that them as only one thing, shows them as only one thing. And that when we are able to tell that single story over and over again, then they become that one thing. This is about power, of course. When somebody else describes what your story is, then therefore they judge you and make you to be that story. That's where stereotypes come from. And we all know how useful stereotypes are, right? Well, Adichie goes on to say that to engage a person properly, we have to engage all of their stories. All of the stories that make that person who they are. So holding on to this idea of the danger of a single story, we come to our text about Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. Now, like most of you, I've heard and read this story many times, and it's one of my favorites. And I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because it's the longest conversation that Jesus had with anyone in the whole Bible, and it's who he chooses to have this longest conversation with. He chose to sit down and talk with someone who was on the margins of society in many ways. First, she's a woman, and a Samaritan woman at that. She's a person who's had many husbands and was living with a man to whom she wasn't married. So many in her day would boil these circumstances down to a single story, a dangerous single story. According to her culture, she was an outsider. No decent, self-respecting woman would have went to the well at noon. In the shade of the evening or the cool of the morning, that's when they would gather at the well for conversation and gossip. The one there at the noonday would have been an outsider. And in Jesus' culture, she was considered an unclean sinner. And we need, I think, to hit pause here for a second and consider the contextual significance of this scene. Jesus, as a white male, was not even supposed to talk to a woman who was not his wife, let alone a Samaritan woman, this sinful foreigner, and let alone take a drink of water from her. Those were the rules, and life is simpler when the rules are clear, right? But as we so often see with Jesus, rules were made to be reinterpreted. Rules, or the law, as the Bible calls it, was intended to lead people to flourish, to be healthy, and to find abundance. Too often, the law, however, both then and now, casts judgment, excludes the outsider and the most vulnerable in favor of those with the most power. But when you look at this text, we notice something here. Jesus doesn't judge her. And he doesn't tell her that she's only welcome to the living water if she changes her ways, if she repents, if she tries to not be a sinner anymore. No. Jesus doesn't put any conditions on receiving the living water of God's grace, because the living water of God's grace is free to everyone. This is an understanding of the law as embedded in grace rather than judgment. Instead, Jesus, in this pivotal story in John's Gospel, is just sitting there with her, sharing a cool drink of water on a hot noonday sun, listening to her, and treating her like a beloved child of God. Because indeed she was a beloved child of God. And speaking of sharing a cool drink of water, recently Becky, Manny, and I watched a couple of seasons of a show called A Series of Unfortunate Events, based on the popular Lemony Snicket series, books by Daniel Handler. Is anyone else familiar with these Lemony? Yeah, you are. I know you guys are. Yeah. So they're a series of children's books, and all these months later, something that the main character, Lemony Snicket, said has stuck with me. In this book, he said these words: "Someone feeling wronged is like someone feeling thirsty. Don't tell them that they aren't, but sit with them and have a drink. Don't tell them they're not thirsty. Sit with them and have a drink." You know, this quote has special meaning today as we consider the fear surrounding this growing pandemic. Now, first of all, we're not called to tell people, don't be afraid. Of course, people are afraid. We're afraid because we care about one another. We're afraid because there are so many misleading rumors out there about what's going on. We're afraid because the security we've become accustomed to is being disrupted. We're afraid because the road ahead is unclear. Our immediate future is unknown. We're afraid, quite frankly, because there's been a lack of responsible leadership or even a coherent message from the government. Of course people are afraid. However, our calling in this moment, I think, our calling as people of faith and as citizens of this nation is to figuratively sit with each other in our common fear, even if sitting together literally isn't wise. But there's a challenge we face in all this. And in these uncertain times, we cannot let our fear eclipse our faith. Our faith, as you all know, is based on what the Apostle Paul calls the greatest of the virtues. And what's the greatest of the virtues? Who knows? Love. Yes. The greatest of these is love. Love of God. Love of neighbor. Love for the least and the lost and the lonely. Love for the marginalized and the oppressed and the poor in our society. Love for the stranger and the enemy and the friend alike. Love for the refugee and the immigrant. Love for those who practice our faith but in a different way. Love for those who practice another religion or no religion at all. Love for all people and all creation. Fear leaves love in the holy temple, as Maya Angelou so poignantly observed, rather than recognizing its liberating presence within and around and among us. My friends, God is that love. This moment isn't a time to succumb to fear. Rather, it's a moment in time to let the light of our love and the courage of our faith illuminate the path for those living coiled in shells of loneliness, so they too might experience a love that comes to sight, to liberate us to life. So as we go forth from this place today, as we go out there into the unknown, may we do so with a myriad of stories, with a wealth of courage. May we do so in lockstep with a God who chose to restore a fallen, foreign woman who was from a different religion and nation and culture, An image of a woman who in many respects is a whole lot like you and me. And as we sit with each other in our common fear, over the course of these next days and weeks and months, may we let our faith in God and our faith in each other be our guiding hope. May it be so for you and for me. Amen. And the people of God said,
Amen.